I would like to introduce our first speaker. Basak Bektas is with the Minnesota State University at Mankato, Minnesota, and her presentation is on protocols for concrete bridge deck protections and treatments.
Hello everyone, I'm very happy to be here. It's always great to come to the partnership meetings and see familiar faces. So I've been at Minnesota State as of August. Some of you may know me from my Iowa days. I've lived in Iowa for 13 years as a student and as a researcher, doing bridge management and other transportation research. There is more teaching now since August for me. Enjoying the new work, but also missing colleagues in Iowa, so that's where I am right now. It's a different setup. If I don't always try to kind of look at both ends, please don't think I'm ignoring you. We'll see kind of how this goes. So many of you in this room actually helped with this research. Let's start there. This is Bill Oliva's baby. He's the champion for this research. And we started almost a little over 2 years back. We currently trying to extend some time because there's still some analysis we want to do. I'll go over those with you. But many of you responded to our initial survey. Again, thank you for that. That will be going into our final report. Many of you also shared your time and data with us. So from Wisconsin, we work with Bill Oliva and Ryan Bowers closely. From Minnesota, Sarah Sandak, Paul Pulaski, and David Hedin met with us online and shared their data. Todd Thompson and others shared data from South Dakota with us. And from Michigan, we had Becky Curtis and Brandon Boatman also share their data. We haven't processed all of the data yet, but I'll go over that in a minute. On this research, my PhD student who is currently in Iowa works closely, Ahmet Al-Baghdadi. It's mostly his analysis and me guiding him, so I would like to acknowledge him here. So the objective for this research was to develop a cost-effective and data-driven life cycle treatment plan for preservation of Wisconsin bridge decks. While doing that, we also wanted to make use of other great data resources and expertise in Midwest because many issues and conditions have similarities. Data-driven here, we were really strong about this. I had strong feelings about this. Bill had strong feelings about this. So the fact that we cannot always put a dollar value on the way we preserve decks, and having collected by many states now more and more detail on what type of work we do, and can we really say this is the impact? That's what we are trying to do with kind of the statistical analysis I'll go through. Some of these charts may be kind of overwhelming when you look at from far. I will try to do my best to summarize to you what they mean so that you can follow them. Our approach was, okay, so we have sometimes these estimates of how much a deck stays in condition rating 7. But there is just so much that goes into it. Early today, we talked about, the traffic and the snow, the de-icer, and how they really are detrimental to the bridges. So here we're trying to include statistically those external factors and kind of show their impact on the bridge performance. Not all bridges within our states everywhere are exposed to the same conditions. This is kind of a snowfall map for an old Wisconsin map that you see. So we're trying to bring in kind of that impact of things such as the icer usage, snowfall, and traffic into our performance models. So we also are focusing on selected bridge deck preservation strategies, including common combinations of deck treatments, because when you say, okay, how is my epoxy overlay performance? Well, how is it if I also seal the deck? What if I do these treatments a year after construction? So there are all these nuances that really factor in. So we're trying to kind of have that granularity in our analysis and attack those. Then another question is ideal timing of these treatments and or treatment combinations with respect to the condition it bridges in or the age. So these are all, there are age and condition thresholds that may also impact performance. So we are trying to also look into that. And finally, find estimated effective time of these treatments. So the data resources we use, and we have the Federal Highway US DOT logo there, but I know you collect your condition rating data, but we use the MBI repository. Today I will be covering the Wisconsin and South Dakota analysis. We are working on Michigan and Minnesota, and hopefully we'll share that to you at one time. So we have condition data from MBI, overlays and sealants, such treatment data either collected by the state or by the regions. So in Wisconsin, we worked with the regions to also gather their collected data, and we had this database compiled, basically bringing everything together at the bridge level and especially joining them. So other data resources we are using are the ICER usage data. Again, we got guidance from the DOT folks on this, and what really particular variables mean, and also traffic operations data. We use, JS a lot to kind of see and make sense of things. So here you're seeing, I'm afraid not very clearly, but the maps, the dots you have is basically the bridges with major treatments, which are mostly overlays, minor treatments, which are mostly sealants, or no treatments. So that's where kind of we started. Which bridges are treated? Which are untreated? And then we started going into the data to see whether it's making sense. So here you're seeing another level of categorization where we have treated, but treated being, this is a new deck, it may be a new bridge. Treated new, but there is also an overlay, there is a sealant. So we basically categorize all of these possible combinations that we saw a lot of observations of that were worthy of modeling for us. So major thing with processing this data, and everybody is in the same boat here. Yes, we are now collecting treatment data, but we are not where we are collecting all the treatment data. We're trying to get there. So when, as a researcher, you're trying to look at statistically to this treated data and trying to find what works better, you have to have this threshold of untreated. But when you don't collect all the data, we're not sure whether something is untreated or we just don't have the treatment data. So some of the slides you will see is us trying to process and reflect on that. So here is kind of the map of bridges that we did not have any treatment records. Some districts kept better. The state kept pretty much everything, but the regional data had some variability. So we looked into the data to basically see two things. I will not get too much of the details of the tables there. I'll briefly explain to you. So if we look at the timeline of MBI condition ratings, what we expect for an untreated bridge is to see what we call monotonically decreasing. So you have 9s, 8s, 7s, 6. Since if you don't do anything, you just have this basically decreasing condition. If you see jumps, if from a 5 you went to a 7, you did something. There may be some subjectivity between inspector decisions now and then, but when we see those big jumps, then something was done. So since if we don't have that record, we don't know what exactly was done, we kind of say, okay, we don't know this data. So it was treated. When we see if it's what I call monotonically decreasing, we know that that's untreated data, and we use it as a reference with respect to the treated bridges or elements. So that effort was done basically for all the data sets that I talk about today, both Wisconsin and South Dakota. So I will refer to time in state often. So state in this research is condition rating, MBI condition rating. So we have looked into how long bridges stay in particular condition ratings. We have a tool that basically pulls in the MBI files and populates, makes time series to see for each bridge which ratings were observed and how long the bridge stayed in there. So these two graphs are kind of showing you where we have seen, although untreated, very high observations of time and state. So we were a little suspicious of those. So we again looked into those. The whole effort is to make sure that we are using the correct reference when we talk about untreated data, so that when we compare the work done and treated data, we can have a good estimate of a performance. So with these efforts, some of the data were excluded to have a correct reference of untreated data. The other data resource we worked with was AVL data. We had records for 7 winter seasons. So basically, we worked with this data and processed it to bring it to the level of every single bridge in terms of salt usage per year. So that's what we worked with as a variable in the analysis. We also have storm data as variables, snowfalls, and of course traffic data, both truck and average AADT. Now that I've talked about so many variables, how do we really look at these? One critical thing is when you include multiple variables together in an analysis, we need to also see how they relate to each other. For example, in our analysis so far, including both truck and AADT, average AADT is not making sense since these are highly correlated variables, as you can imagine. Another thing is we're seeing this, although small, correlation with snowfall and traffic. We are not sure how to make of it, but it's not everything is causal in statistics. Rarely things are. So we are making sure that we are cognizant of these factors to include in our analysis. So the way we looked at these TIS observations, time and state, we basically have this classification. So we have untreated, but also untreated also there is also new but untreated data, new construction, sealed, new and sealed, overlaid, new and overlaid, sealed and overlaid, new, sealed and overlaid. So these are kind of the general classifications. Although a little blurry, if you look at those graphs below, you're going to see these stars on those time and state observations. The logic here is, for example, for the first one, that concrete overlay, which was done maybe to the end of condition rating 6, that has an impact on that observation of 7 that comes after it. So that's kind of what we are trying to include in our analysis, and that's why, Bill, we are taking so long, is we are trying to carry out those relationships through the timeline and not treat these observations as independent of each other, because they are not independent of each other. So when you look at the right side, for example, for that first start one with sealant, yes, that's treatments, that sealing treatments impacted that observation for 7. But also, do we observe any relationship for the next observation? And also, how do we then look into performance for that final observation where you had an overlay, but you also sealed the deck afterwards? So after looking into these TIS observations, we had also 2 things. So we have a bridge may be treated at one point in its life, right? One of the components. So, but also there is the rating level where, yes, you may have treated the deck when it's a 7, but that doesn't mean level 6 had any treatments. So we are kind of looking at it both ways to see how treated bridges or also treated ratings perform. From this, so I want to just show you, get your attention for the final table there. Basically here, this is a very preliminary analysis of the mean time and state observations for different condition ratings. So the top row you see is new structure and the performance, how many years it stayed in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. So then for overlaid structures, sealed and overlaid, you see different performance. The sum that I show in the end is the sum of all of them together. So a quick observation here, without going into the level of all these variables I talked about, you see that the untreated has a sum of almost 21 and a half years there. When you look at the overlaid structures, you see a general 34-year performance. So now, in this big chart that you're seeing, one thing I will highlight and then pass on. Now we are trying to bring the snowfall, the de-icer usage into these different estimates to really show. We may not be able to find statistical significance for every level where these variable levels intersect. The greens that you see on the screen, that's where we have a lot of observations. So we won't have enough data to comment on every single level combination, but we are trying to, in the end, be able to say that for when you have this much traffic on a roadway, and if this is a heavily salted road, and if you have a newer bridge, here are the things that you should consider doing because they would perform better. Or here are the sequence of treatments that you should consider. Another thing we are trying to say is a year after, or right after, or maybe 5 years into a particular rating or age, you should consider these treatments. And in the end, this is one part of the research. The final thing that we will also be doing is bringing these together in and doing the engineering economic analysis to show how alternative kind of treatment ways you can follow through the life cycle of bridges so that you have cost-effective treatment plans for your different environments in a Midwest state. My student Ahmed was very excited when we got the South Dakota data and processed it. So he even put pictures thought, so I figured I keep the slide. I didn't want to exclude his slide. So far I talked about the Wisconsin data analysis. Although very similar process, the way agencies keep data is different, so we also tend to then look into it a little bit differently. I will not go through the processing, so the overall approach is similar. But in South Dakota, we were happy to see, very detailed treatment records for many bridges entire their life cycle. So we had like these treatments going way back than the kind of the MBI history we were looking at. And we were also happy with this variability in the different types of treatments and the way they were recorded in a sequence. For example, here you're seeing, so the timeline we are looking into, the MBI TIS we are looking into is that 1990 to 2017. In the database, Todd had these previous treatments going way back when. So we have those as like previous treatments, and then we also keep these treatments within the observation period. So this is a quick map of, again, we did similar processing for some rises, but we haven't seen a lot of suspicious data points as far as this type of data goes. So the blue are the data points that we kept in analysis. This is again explaining the concept of no treatment is observed for one of those TIS observations for different ratings. We call them untreated. And then when we have treatments, and maybe for that treatment 5, you see that it was treated before, then we consider those kind of relationships in the analysis. For example, in this chart, with the box plots, we are trying to show the difference between treated and untreated data for different ratings. Then we started going into the detail, okay, when we group all these treatment combinations that we see a lot of, and also the untreated data, can we say that some treatment combinations performed significantly different than the untreated bridges? So for the orange ones that you see, so a concrete overlay with asphalt overlay followed by an asphalt overlay, an epoxy followed by a concrete overlay with epoxy, and then performance of epoxy-coated rebars in a deck, and concrete overlay followed by epoxy. So some of these combinations, we saw that they were significantly behaving differently, so then that's what we focused on for the rest of the analysis. And we now have, and I should specify that Todd has not reviewed or approved any of these yet. These are preliminary. So we see, for example, the blue one up there. That's concrete overlay with asphalt overlay followed with another asphalt overlay, for example. That was performing significantly differently than all the others. The purple one is epoxy followed by concrete overlay and epoxy. This bottom one may be of interest. So basically, the reference TIS for untreated decks is 5.4 years for what we are looking here. So you're seeing, for example, for that concrete overlay, asphalt overlay followed by asphalt overlay, that the mean performance was 16 years. And you have all these varying higher performance for these other treatments with reference to the TIS. So then the next question becomes, okay, once we know, we have confident estimates of how long with a treatment a bridge stays in a rating longer, what does that mean economically? We are not there yet. That will be our next step to give an answer to that. Because then we need to look into time value of money, added performance, and bring them together for the engineering economic analysis. The graph is a little complicated the way it is shown, but in summary, it showed us, this analysis showed us that the more treatment you have within an MBI rating, the higher TIS. So at least doing bridge work works was the gist of that graph. So we also just looked at the added TIS for particular rating and also looked into the relative comparison of alternative treatments. So again, the epoxy followed by concrete overlay and epoxy was a winner with 11 added years here. We will, moving forward, be looking into more detail into these 7 treatment combinations for South Dakota analysis. Another thing we are looking, as I mentioned, is leg of treatments. So we now started looking into, okay, these 7 treatment combinations, how soon after a rating or at what age do we see better performance? So that's what we are also trying to get now. So moving forward, we want to also bring in the de-icer usage and traffic into the time and state observations. So with that, future work is basically a refinement of the Wisconsin performance and iteration models. We want to quickly start into Minnesota and Michigan data analysis. For Minnesota, we did the TIS work, so we have kind of the numbers. We haven't done the analysis part yet. With Michigan, we are having a little issue with the bridge numbers. Our tool is not working with those bridge numbers somehow, so I may give you a call. And then, as I said, combining all of these analysis results for a cost-effective data-driven lifecycle plan, which will have in our plans ideal timing of treatments, combination of treatments for particular conditions, and added life. We're hoping to complete the work in late July this year, and I'm glad now my student is working full-time on this project because we have still a lot to do. With that, I hope I could explain some of the stuff that we are doing with this analysis, and at this time, if I have time, one winner question.
So from your data gathering from a number of different DOTs, are you seeing a lot of different strategies or more commonality between the Midwest DOTs?
I think there are commonalities. There are things that I think everybody feels like that they work. That was also kind of the result of the analysis, but there are also different opinions. So I'm hoping the analysis will kind of maybe give some findings on that, and I think that gives me an idea that could be a good comparison to have in the report, final report too, what commonly works and what other, things that we found that works, but maybe not as often were employed.
Quick question for you. You're talking about the salt usage in terms of ton per lane per mile or something like that?
So we tried to bring it to bridge deck level.
Okay.
So we kind of went with, so we factored in the number of lanes, the kind of, because it's per lane mile usage. So we needed to bring it into the area and then bring it to the deck area. So we work with deck areas for that.
Okay, so you converted that to, how do you correlate that to surface chloride loading for the deck? And is that what is used for your surface line modeling to predict?
We are only treating the amount of salt a bridge deck gets per year as a variable. We are not going into that level of detail for this particular analysis, because what we are trying to say in the end is, depending on these roads where you are heavily salted, maybe the treatment combinations or their frequency should be different. So it's more high level than I think what you have in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Basak. I look forward to it. Are you going to be around during break? Will you be around for a little while? Okay.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.